The morning hymns, are we ready? Am I making good volume? Okay. The morning hymns were appropriate to the subject matter of the message. The title of the message today is, As the Devil Seeks to Devour, Be Wise as Serpents, Yet Harmless as Doves. And I want to start by turning to Luke chapter 16, verse 1. We'll do a little bit of jumping around. This isn't going to be a long one. So before I read this passage, I will tell you about not making good preparations. When I was younger, I was a Sunday school teacher for young children, and sometimes I winged it. What I found I could do is I could just read a Bible passage, and I would expound on it in my peculiar ways, and the kids would all look and go, ooh, at what I'd said, and it was lots of fun. There's some joy in teaching children or anyone who listens to what you say and goes, ooh, because it means it had an effect. So it is great to have an effect. So I read this passage during one Sunday school, and I think that the way it was translated into English is not the best. Even in the King James Bible, and I'm going to expound on that. When I first read it, I looked at the kids and I said, you know what? I don't really know what Jesus meant by that passage. I mean, it is outright confusing to me. I'll have to get back to you next week. And the kids said, okay. And I was a little embarrassed because when you first read this, you might scratch your head and think, what was Jesus saying here? Okay, Luke chapter 16, beginning to read at verse 1. This is talking about Jesus. Now he said to his disciples, there was a rich man who received an accusation that his manager was squandering his possessions. So he called the manager in and asked, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you can no longer be my manager. Then the manager said to himself, what will I do since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig. I am ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I'm removed from management, people will welcome me into their homes. Now, doesn't this sound like corporate America today? In my software industry, one thing that really gets you ahead is coming out looking good. It doesn't really matter how hard you work or how well you actually did get things working. It's just taking proper credit and coming out looking good, and this is the art of being a good career politician. And sometimes it is the art of rounding up a congregation, pleasing the most people, coming out looking good. So this fellow knows this, verse 5 now. So he summoned each one of his master's debtors. How much do you owe my master? He asked the first one. 100 measures of olive oil, he said. Take your invoice, he told him. Sit down quickly and write 50. Next he asked another, how much do you owe? 100 measures of wheat, he said. Take your invoice, he told him, and write 80. The master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd, in a sense wiser, than the children of light in dealing with their own people. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth, mammon, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. Now, eternal in the Greek, it's, as best I can pronounce it, aionios. Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and whoever is unrighteous in very little is also unrighteous in much. So if you have not been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with what is genuine? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to someone else, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, since either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, if you're reading this for the first time or you never thought you had to expound on that, you find that confusing. Okay. At the end, Jesus says, you cannot serve both God and money and worldly possessions, where the rust destroys and the moths creep in and eat, and the thieves break in and steal. So that was a theme from a prior Sunday. But what really threw me for a loop was when Jesus said, make friends for yourselves by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. And that's how it's often translated into the English. And when you the whole point of the gospel, one major point is not to be friends with the world. We're supposed to be in the world, but not of it. Jesus said, because I have chosen you, because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of this world, therefore the world hateth you. If the world hates you, know that it hated me first. I'm paraphrasing as best I remember. There are lots of passages where Jesus and the apostles said, friendship with the world is enmity with God. And it is true. If the world hates you, that probably means you're speaking the truth, because the world hates the truth. When Adam and Eve cut that spiritual umbilical cord, they instinctively wanted to be their own gods. And the whole world's, the second oldest religion in the world is, you can be your own God. If you study Scientology, the basic premise is you can be your own God. And if you study Mormonism, ultimately you will become your own God. They're just variations of that second oldest religion in all the world, which was proposed by the serpent. That first serpent was very wise. Now, one major point I want to bring out here is the word aionios. Most of the time it is translated eternal, but it can also mean long ages ago or age old. So when Jesus said, make friends for yourself by means of worldly wealth, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into their age-old dwellings. I don't believe he was calling the institutions and the organizations of this world eternal dwellings, because another major point of the gospel is they're not eternal. They are all going to perish in the day of judgment. But I believe he was saying age-old dwellings. And really, to sum it up, and I'm going to bring this point home, I really believe Jesus was telling them, you live in this world, the people of this world are shrewd, they know how to deal with their own to come out looking good and make it in this world. And Jesus was telling them, it is good for you to be knowledgeable of how this world functions. Okay, they're going to do it better than you, but be knowledgeable of how this world functions, so that you can function in this world, be in the world but not of it. It is confusing when you first read it. So I want to digress a little bit now. I'm going to tell you things that no other minister can, because these are based on personal experiences. Our home is kind of out in the outskirts, beyond Covington. If I don't mow the lawn and keep it trimmed, tall grass attracts the mice. And if you get lots of mice, before long, they just can catch a little whiff of dog food you might have spilled in the garage. And they have amazing sniffers, and they go in, and this happened at our house. I made a mistake lifting up the dog's food that I spilled some on the floor, and I tried to sweep it up, but I know I missed some. And before long, we had a mouse problem. We knew there was a mouse problem because just a little bit of specks of mouse poop on the floor. My wife disinfected royally. She put a lot of precautions in place to try to keep those mice at bay. And we noticed that the dog's food from their dish, it was like they were eating a lot more food. But there was no way a few mice could have been eating that much food. It was a little bit confusing. Maybe the dogs are extra hungry. So we just got extra food. And we knew there were mice, and so my mother and my wife, they put out mouse traps. They put them in strategic locations in the garage, put them all over, and it was very obvious there was still mouse activity in that garage, but no mouse traps were tripped at all. And some of the mouse traps were tripped when the bait was gone, but there were no mouse in the trap. And let me tell you, last night I was watching some videos. Okay, there were people who were taking videos trying to figure out, why am I not able to snare these mice? Okay, and so they showed, there were some amazing videos, because mice, they don't live that long, they reproduce and have children. I really believe that mice are somehow able to communicate to the young. You see that steel trap there? That one killed your great-grandfather Harold. Don't go anywhere near that trap, because on these videos, the mice, they will come up and they'll sniff at that food, and they're very hesitant, and a lot of them just instinctively know, no, there's danger there, just leave that food alone. I watched some more amazing videos where a rat was very hesitant approaching a trap on this video that guy recorded at night, and there were rocks nearby, so this rat, after hesitating and sniffing at it, but never touching it and setting that trap off, he push this rock right into the trap. And when it snapped, then he grabbed the bait and ran off real quick. And so you scratch your head and think, that is amazing, because we thought they're not very intelligent. They certainly do grotesque things, and they're actually, I would call that using tools to achieve their goal. And so this is supposed to be a symbol. We've learned that more and more animals are actually able to use tools to achieve their goals. We keep learning more and more. These creatures made by God are more intelligent than we expect. So about this dog food, they also, another thing that they do to survive, these mice, is they think, I need to store up food in case of disaster. It's like they're constantly at worry. They're hardwired to worry, and they're even thinking a time may come when I don't have enough food. So instinctively, when they can, they store it somewhere. And at one time, I needed to check something behind the stove, or I went down on the floor to get something because I dropped it underneath the oven. And when I went down and looked, I thought, what is that? That's a little dog food. And I got the flashlight and looked, and I said, that's not a little dog food. That's all the dog food. They in the night, avoiding our 3 dogs, who are quick little schnauzers, they kept gathering that dog food and they piled it high behind the stove. And I said, oh, gross, we can't leave that in there. And then I thought, if they did it there, I wonder if they did it anywhere else. And I went over to the dishwasher and I peeked in behind. They also stockpiled it up behind the dishwasher, right up and I thought, unbelievable that they took the time to do that. And so it took great precautions. And what happened is we weren't catching them in our traps, just like the YouTube videos. And so we had to hire an exterminator. And the exterminator said, modern mice, they are too wise to get caught by those old traps. Those worked in older days, but it seems the mice have somehow learned to stay away from those traps. I think they communicate to their young, something like that. So he said, now the traps that work are these sticky, gooey things. We ultimately caught the mice. We called that one mouse Einstein, because he seemed to be so smart to keep from getting in there. Now, there is a reason. I was going to read a little from Why Aren't Mousetraps Effective? This is from an expert site, wittpm.com. Why aren't mousetraps effective? They said here, the expert said, mice are wired with a threat avoidance behavior that will protect them from many mousetrap designs. And later it says, when you think you've gotten the last mouse in your home and your traps are no longer catching anything, it may only be that the infesting mice learn to stay away from those traps or those areas. Okay. Now, the reason I bring this up, it might seem off topic. I'm going to read some verses and see if you can draw a parallel here. They're just verses. So I'm going to quote the Proverbs. A sensible person sees danger and takes cover. The inexperienced keep going and are punished. Proverbs 27:12. Now, in Matthew 10:16-17, Jesus told his disciples, look, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be shrewd as serpents and as innocent as doves. Beware of them, because they will hand you over to local courts and flog you in their synagogues. They're going to hate you. And all those disciples, who I believe became apostles after they saw Jesus, the ones that were still there, they suffered for the gospel. Some of them, John, the beloved, who was fortunate, he just got banished to an island. Other ones, historically, we know they got imprisoned and put to death. Paul was warned by an angel, the way I'm binding this belt, that's how the person's going to be bound who goes to Rome. And Paul thought, well, to die is gain. He was raring to go. Went from being an enemy of Christ to suddenly being so exuberant for the gospel, a chosen vessel for the Lord. So Jesus told that to his disciples. Now, one of his important disciples, apostles, Peter wrote in 1 Peter 5:8-9. He said, be sober-minded, be alert. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for anyone he can devour. Resist him, firm in the faith, knowing that the same kind of sufferings are being experienced by your fellow believers throughout the world. And Jesus was tempted in every like manner as we are. So we don't have any documentation, but I believe Jesus may well have been tempted by women who fell in love with him and said, come away, don't spend so much time on your ministry, run away with me. But Jesus, I'm sure he had self-control. That will be a subject for another message down the road. Okay. Now, so repeatedly in the scriptures, they describe the devil and his minions and his agents in this world, because this world is the devil's domain. Adam and Eve sold this world out to the devil to become the world ruler. They describe them as prey, as wolves or as serpents. So we're told, be shrewd and be wise. What will these serpents do? What are their methods of temptation? What are their snares? What are the devil's snares to snare you up? Because it behooves you to be wise, and you have to keep up to date. Popped into my mind, in my profession, I am just barely learning things fast enough. I've had troubling news because I've been stuck being a tester for well over a decade, and I've just been told the fact that you put tester on your resume now is not good, because they've determined we just don't want testers. We want people who are developers to test and develop at the same time. So it's like the profession I've been in, the particular one, has kind of gone obsolete. I cannot seem to keep up to date with the latest technology, though I keep struggling and trying, and they can see it at my work. So my profession is hard. Now let me tell you, with the technology of our day, it's very much like the Tower of Babel. God, he saw, if they are able to do this tower and all stay united as mankind, they're going to be united in their cause for evil. Nothing they imagine to do will be restrained from them. So just like they said, go to, let us build us a tower that reaches to heaven, God said, go to, let us. God refers to himself in the plural. Let us go down and confound their language. So they won't understand one another's speech. They will be divided. And by being divided, even if they're divided in their causes for evil, their ability to achieve evil will not be so bad, maybe. That probably was God's thought. If they're united, they're going to be united in their cause for evil. In this world with our technology, in a lot of ways, we seem to have overcome language barriers, because when you get online, if you go to a site, my father's vonbora.com. He used to have vonbora.com, and then he realized, we shouldn't say .com because we're not a company, we are an organization. So he just let that domain name go, and then after it went, we had visitors to vonbora.com, some nasty industry took over it. And it's written in China, but if you copy the words out and put it in Google Translate, it says some nasty thing. And so I said, well, great, Dad, you lost your domain name, and somebody took it over because it was a popular site, and now it's being used to promote evil. So there is a language barrier, but we have increasing technology that allows us to just read and know what somebody wrote in another language. We're getting to the point where the artificial intelligence, the expensive ones, can hear one person speak one language and just formulate it into words so that somebody else can hear it in their own language. We're overcoming that barrier as mankind. We have more and more amazing means to introduce temptations and evils to the world, to facilitate them. They are all over the internet. I won't expound too much, but I will dwell on this one in another Sunday. What I'm trying to tell you is, as mankind's ability improves, their technology, our temptations seem to grow all the more. The devil uses those technologies in new ways. So what I'm saying is, it is not good enough to be aware of all the temptations that we had 20, 30 years ago. Try to be on guard for all the new temptations of today. It's just like my profession. I'm always struggling to learn the latest technology. It's very similar, I see, how the devil and this evil world, they keep adapting to find new ways to introduce temptation and bring you down the slippery slope onto the broad path that leads to destruction. That will be more of a subject later, but that ties in with this one. The ways of this world and the ways of the devil are ever evolving, so try to be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And I will try to warn you about them here as I talk to you. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the prey and predators. Last night I was searching, I looked at this site, biologypages.info, and it talks about some of the ways the prey defend themselves from predators. Now, first, when I read this, I just mentioned the Bible likens us to the prey, that we need to be wise as serpents but harmless as doves, and we're described as the prey of this world. The devil would like to devour us. So I want to, on this site it says, one of the ways, I'm not quoting it directly, I'm paraphrasing. One of the ways living creatures deter predators are to group together, watch over each other, and defend each other. Okay. So, some examples, herds of musk oxen or bisons, they know to band together. So while one of them might be vulnerable to wolves getting up on it and biting it and eventually bringing it down, they know it behooves us to stay together. Some other good examples that they mentioned on this site and even on Wikipedia. When a honeybee stings or gets killed, you know that if you come across a swarm of bees, the best thing I think to do is to run. Because when they sting, if one stings you, it releases this chemical called isoamyl acetate. And when that chemical is released in the air, any other bees nearby, they sense that's in the air. That tells them a bee has just stung. That makes them angry and aggressive, so they want to join in and sting too. And so if you hit a bee also and squash it, it will release that chemical. The other bees will sense it, and they will get angry, and they will all join in. And if you get too many bee stings, all those little stings can add up. Hopefully you're not allergic to bee stings. People have been killed by being stung too much by bees, if they all just keep injecting them. Now, the parallel I want to draw is, I'm going to just read from Hebrews 10:24-25. The author of Hebrews, who might have been John Mark, I used to think it was Matthias, he said, "Let us watch out for one another to provoke love and good works, not neglecting to gather together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So the parallel is the bees sense one of my fellow bees is under attack. I can smell it. Or she is stung, or she has been killed. That makes me aggressive, and I'm jumping to action. In a past Sunday, we talked about empathy. When your brother or sister is heartbroken, we sung about even when my heart is breaking. It is a big help when somebody is just there to be a soft shoulder to cry on, to say, I know that was a tremendous loss. We feel for you. That helps to build up your brother and sister unto love and good works. Let me tell you, it doesn't take much. Even a dog can put his head on your lap and say, I know you feel bad because I can smell it. And there's something in just knowing someone is sharing your pain, bearing the load. So even if you're not very smart, if you just tell someone, I understand you're heartbroken, and we feel for you and you're praying for you, that actually does a world of good. And when you see that your believer Christian brothers or sisters are under attack, maybe they're under attack for owning a bakery and saying, I can't make a cake to celebrate your homosexual marriage because sex exists in nature to give rise to children, and the Bible has declared this behavior to be unnatural and dangerous. And so he came under attack for that, and he had to go all the way to SCOTUS, to the Supreme Court of the United States, to argue I don't have to make a cake to support what the Bible declares to be unbiblical. That we've dwelled on these before. It's a shame it had to go all the way up to the highest court. We're living in a dangerous age. So the other parallel I wanted to make is it's also said on that website, biologypages.info. Herds of musk oxen, or bisons, as we saw just a few weeks ago with my family, they instinctively know to keep the younger and weaker near the center of their herd, while the more capable guard the perimeter. Okay. The parallel, they know we're going to look out for each other. And they might instinctively know when I get too old and I'm not big and tough to tackle those predators who try to come and devour our herd, then I will graduate to the center, and the other younger, more powerful bulls will stand on guard. There is a parallel in the church. I can't read it, but 1 Corinthians 12 says people have been given different gifts in the church. So he said in that passage, he said, well, the eye has an important function for the body. The ear has an important function for the body. And the feet and the hands do too. And so can the hand say, because I am not an eye, I am not part of the body. I'm not important. Paul explained they all serve their purposes, and they are every bit as much part of the body as those other parts that do important things. So the parallel is, in the church, it is observable there are people who have greater spiritual gifts, and it is great if we all had the exact same spiritual gifts, just like Paul said. If everything was an eye, where would the hearing be? There's a reason why God has given us all different gifts, and it helps us to be aware. I can't do everything. I am dependent on my fellow believers. And that's, the scriptures told us, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together, because we can provoke one another to love and good works, and we can observe you're in danger. The world is coming to attack you, so we're going to go into prayer. We're going to let the world know you've come under attack for standing up for what is right. Christians should feel that way towards each other, even ones who differ in doctrine to an extent. I know that this baker, he was a Baptist. I sincerely believe by his works and all the risks he took, I believe he was a sincere Christian because he risked it all. He risked mass fines. His life was thrown into difficulty until his case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And thank you, Lord, that one won. Quite a shame that there have been people with good, firm religious convictions based on the teachings of Christ who owned a pharmacy. And when someone came and said, I want Plan B, because I've been horsing around living a lifestyle of fornication, and Plan B is a way of covering up my sin, so I don't have to be responsible for children. Because, sex doesn't exist in nature because it gives rise to children. Sex exists in nature because it feels good. Well, that's the way the world thinks, to live an open life of fornication. So there was a case in Washington State where a pharmacist said, I'm not going to give you that. Go, the state says it's legal, you probably can find another pharmacy to do it. I don't even want to supply you with that, because that would be a sin. And in this state, this was a more tragic, and where it wound up was they told him, if you are a pharmacist, you've got to hand that over to people who live lifestyles of fornication, who don't understand that sex exists in nature to give rise to children. And if you're going to indulge, you're supposed to be married, and you'd better be ready to take responsibility for children. So, just like the herds, they know these animals are more capable, they will be on the outside to keep guard. We in the church, it is good to discern who has abilities in what area and to function and look out for each other with the abilities we have. Me, I don't have a great ability for public speaking. I do have some knowledge about all the evils of this world and how technology opens new opportunities for the devil all the time. Subject for later. So I plan to expound on the things I know in ways that these well-learned doctorate theologians may not have considered, because I might have something to offer. We all should value each other and love each other deeply and know to look out for each other. Okay, so I've driven that point home. I have other ones to make here. When Jesus said, be wise as serpents, yet harmless as doves, kind of summary mode. It's kind of ironic to me that the first serpent that was very powerful, that threw all of mankind into this world of sin, was the devil himself. Eve should have been wise, but she took his word for it. God's lying to you. You can be your own God. And now we live in a sin-cursed world. So that passage, make friends with the mammon of this world, I want to kind of summarize it. I believe Jesus was telling us, and the apostles have told us too, we should be wise to all the snares and temptations of the world under the dominion of that serpent who deceived Eve. Jesus even advised us to be shrewd, using our knowledge of the world to defend ourselves. Okay, but we should be harmless as doves, never entertaining or employing the evils of this world. So it's hard to understand, because Paul said, I would have you ignorant of the things of this world, but knowledgeable of God. it is a fine line. I would encourage, be aware of all the new temptations. But what Paul was saying was, he said, I'd have you ignorant of the things of this world. Don't be so knowledgeable that you're tempted all the more. We're walking a fine, narrow path, that it's hard to stay on that narrow path in this world. So it helps to be knowledgeable, but don't become so knowledgeable that you're all the more tempted by the evils out there. And when it says, be harmless as doves, I believe we're warned very strictly, don't use the evil tools of this world to your advantage. You should not use evil so that good may come of it. Don't compromise and say, well, I'm going to make friends with, false churches because it gives me more money, and in the end I can accomplish greater good. Be aware of the career politicians out there and their tools, but don't employ them. And that is really the summary of my message today. The devil seeks to devour, so be wise as serpents, but be harmless as doves. And with that, I would like to call on Pastor Robert Anderson to close in prayer.